Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'm just going to be kind of just sharing my thoughts. This is going to be more of a video of solidarity to Black women. I don't have many references for this video. This is just going to be like pure experience based. I'll go ahead and reference the Substack article that I read. I don't even know if that would be considered an article. I mean, is it a column? Like, what is it? I don't know. But there was a Black woman. She wrote about just her experience within the Black church and just how the Black church preys on Black women, simply put, and how it so often promises Black women so many things. If only Black women would essentially give more, be more, they would have more. And sometimes that more can look like a marriage. Sometimes that more can look like, certain careers and things like that. While we know simultaneously the church typically discourages secular education, I do think we are moving a little bit past that now within like religious circles. I also kind of want to give this disclaimer too, because I know that you guys, any believer can feel me on this as well. And I know I spoke with one of you. Well, we didn't speak, but the comments that we've had and the commentary that we've shared, one of my community posts, just talking about how difficult it is to really kind of find the language that acknowledges the sensitivity of this topic, right? Of the Black church being a haven while simultaneously being something like a concubine for a lot of us. And so a lot of grief there. I definitely would like to know if Black men have had some of the similar experiences. I don't think so. And I say that because it is rooted in like, I don't want to say patriarchy because I just think that that's an inappropriate use of the word, but it is male centered, right? I was actually listening to my Pandora, my traditional gospel station, and there was a song that came on, and he was just talking about God and et cetera, et cetera. But he gave this example of like women, and he was like, you got all those shoes in your closet and da 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 da, and it's not going to make you happy. And this is the thing that just always breaks my heart, because I'm noticing it more and more. And it's not to say that it's anything that is new, but I'm more so noticing it now that I'm more consciously aware of it, and just how the Black church has played so severely and so heavily on the hearts and the minds, right within the psychology of Black women, even in our spiritual essence. And that is something that brings me a great sense of grievance. So that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. So I'll just go ahead and start off by saying, I felt like my life got worse once I came to the church, right? I had grew up, and my first introduction to Jesus was my grandmother. I remember being a little girl, right? And I was probably like 6. It was definitely at the age of like recollection, yeah. I was a young woman, not a young woman, what am I saying? I was a young girl, I was a child, but I remember being so young, and I remember my grandmother singing this song. She was like, Jesus loves me, yes he does, because the Bible tells me so. And I just remember that harmony staying with me, and that really planted a seed. And so I remember sometimes I would do things, and it was like, I don't know, I just felt like somebody was watching me. And so, for example, I remember one Christmas, I was praying to Santa, for something bad I had done. And I can honestly say, like, that was really like a spiritual encounter for me, like in terms of just my introduction to God, because at that young age, I knew somebody was watching over me. And I felt the need to do the right thing. I felt the need to do the right thing, and I would have convictions about doing the right thing. And I was very sensitive about what's right and wrong, and, given the adults in my life and things like that, just looking at their bad behavior and knowing that this is not right, So it was very real for me. Like, my encounter with God was very real. And I do feel in many ways that like I am God's child, and that's just my personal experience. And so, we would grow up, we would go to funerals, we would go to churches on Easter and things like that, but it wasn't anything that was regular. So there was no routine for me. I didn't grow up in the church, right? Once I got a little bit older, got away from my grandmother, when I say got away, I mean like, your teenage years, adolescence, you're kind of just like figuring things out for yourself. I was like 12, 13, 14, I didn't go to church, you know, and so that was the end of that for me, you know. But I still had that foundation of faith, and I still had that foundation of like doing the right thing. And it got to a point where it just kind of felt good to me to do the right thing, because I was realizing how many people were doing the wrong thing. And I just, you know, just grew up pretty humbled, you know, humble beginnings, bullying, you know, things like that. So, you know, for me, I just felt like, you know, it was kind of like small fry, underdog growing up. So, you know, I did have that relationship with God. And then I got a little bit older, fast forward. And this is just, again, me giving a little bit of context. Fast forward, I remember like 2018, I dropped out of college. I wanted to figure out what my purpose was. So I sought that, you know, in church. I started listening to more like sermons and reading my Bible and things like that. But it was also coupled with like spirituality, you know. So that was kind of how I was living my life. And then there was kind of like this introduction to this idea that spirituality was essentially demonic. And this came from religious family members that I had in my life at the time who were in the church. And so this was so new to me, because at the time, you know, I was reading my Bible. I was really hope-filled, right? That's what, if you go back and listen to my podcast with like Earth is Dead, you know, it's like over 400 podcasts. But if you go back and listen to my earlier works, like I was very hope-filled. I was reading my Bible. I was spiritual. I was meditating. But I never, like, my sense of spirituality, I wasn't trying to conjure up superpowers. You know, I wasn't, you know, trying to tap into, like, it was nothing like that. You know, I started meditating and leaning towards spirituality for my mental health. I think just as a young person, and to any young person watching this, just quite naturally, you're going to have anxiety, you know, about life, because the world is crazy and there's so much you don't know. And if you are someone who doesn't really have like a more conventional path, there's a lot of uncertainty, right? So just quite naturally, you're going to be a little insecure because you don't really know what to expect. Like for me, dropping out of college, that was my sense of security, you know, and it's true, right? Like, because college kind of gives you the opportunity to be on a somewhat straight and narrow. You have direction in your life. And when you don't have that, things start to spiral. You don't have, you know, routine. You don't have, you know, any plans, you know, you're just kind of like out here thugging it. And that takes a lot of courage. But I just think as a young person, you don't really have that because you don't really know what you're capable of. This is all so new for you. So looking back, that was a really big venture that I took on at such a young age. But anyway, so I met with these religious family members who really doubled down on the demonization of my spirituality. It got to me. It actually got to me. I remember I would do like hot yoga and things like that. These ideologies started to impact my sense of spirituality to the point where it started to change the way I looked at the world and the practices that I was engaging in. And I'm not saying this in a space of conviction, because I really felt like I was bullied out of something that was very harmonic, and bullied out of something that was, I would say, good for me. You know, it was good for me, but I don't know. So anyway, that's just a little context. Fast forward, I'm living my life and I'm leaning more and more into the church, right? I'm having heartbreaks. Okay, I'm having friendship betrayals. I'm trying to find my way as this young 20-something-year-old girl. And it's like, you know, things happen and it's just quite natural. You know what I mean? That these things are going to happen. But when you come to the church or when you're listening to these sermons, the justifications is that you're not living right. You're not living right. And so I'm like, okay, you know, I do feel a little off when I engage with certain things and certain behaviors. And, you know, I'm doing certain things with certain people that I probably know I shouldn't be doing. So maybe it's time to make some changes in my life. And that was really the start of the plummeting of my self-esteem and my self-confidence within myself. I felt like I had lost all sense of agency over my life and my personal well-being. It got to the point where subconsciously this religious projection that was then forced onto me, it led me to believe that I could no longer make decisions for myself. I stopped trusting in myself. I started to seek answers from things outside of me. It was like external. Okay. And so that was when I really started to lean more on these religious communities, because subconsciously what it does is it makes you think, okay, well, this person must have all the answers. They must have all the answers, because you know, maybe they're married or whatever the case may be. And I think marriage specifically is such a sensitive topic for Black women, because you have to understand, like, as much as we say what we want to say, I don't think that there is a marriage crisis, because Black people are getting married every day, and we've been doing so for decades in spite of, right, all of the rhetoric. But at the end of the day, it's one of those things to where we have to be honest about the disproportionate amount of, we have to be honest about the disproportions, right? It is very true, okay? Compared to white women, and I'm saying that because that's just typically how we make our contrast in American society, okay? We're not looking at other demographics. Let's just not get too technical here. But, you know, white women, when they're ready to have children, right? Like, I didn't really start feeling maternal until I was like 25, just saying. But, you know, when women start to feel maternal, white women have this opportunity to go ahead and say, yeah, I'm ready to partner, I'm ready to marry. There's a sense of security. There's the opportunity, and it happens for them. Black women, when you have that biological, physiological desire to do what you were created to do, which is to bring a child into the world. And I'm not saying that from a pushy standpoint. I'm saying that from a more biological, like, standpoint, you know, anthropic standpoint, like, you know, just human desires, you know what I mean? That is a lot more challenging for you to navigate. And so if this thing is something that disproportionately impacts you in your community, but the solution is that if you would just live right and do right, then you could have that thing, then everybody's going to buy that. You know what I mean? Everybody's buying that. And so for me, the person who had came into my life at the time, and I feel like people who were coming into my life at the time had the thing that I didn't have. I was outside of the club, okay? And I wanted to be a part of that club. And not because I felt like I was on a timeline, but just biologically, you know? And I felt like mentally and just all those different things. And let me just say this too, for anybody who is gonna kind of try to counteract this, and you want to feel that sense of rebuttal, and you want to be like, well, you know, you shouldn't be on a timeline, and did you have all of these other factors such as like your finances and et cetera in order? Please understand that only Black women are expected to justify their womanhood. Only Black women have to defend their motherhood. I mean, their desires for motherhood, even their motherhood, right? Black women's mothering rather, is demonized. Black women's children, right, are like, please understand what I'm saying about our experience and how peculiar it is, and how no other woman has to go through this, right? No other woman has to overcome the hurdles of finding a partner, because most men around that age and time, right, they're communally, it's completely different. Culturally, it's different, right? Like, the structure is different. But in our culture, there is a pedestalization of exceptionalism, as well as, you know, entertainment. So we are just dealing with two completely different factors that really dictate where people kind of gravitate and where people go within our society. It's not the same. And for a lot of Black women, you don't really get that privilege of being a woman and doing all those things. That's why for a lot of us, you know, there is no point in being vulnerable. Because when you come out and you express your vulnerabilities, the first thing is like, get back in line. Okay, get back in line. Be strong, right? Don't cry over that. Don't, you know what I mean? And that's just how we were raised. Like, that's just what it is. I always say, I think Black women are born and bred to be like pit bulls. And it's really because there's really no other way for us to exist. Nobody's coming to save us. No one's coming to protect us. And there certainly is not any empathy for our experiences as a collective. Okay? As a collective. Okay? And that's just all across the board. So anyway, a lot of women, a lot of people who are in religious communities will oftentimes use what they have in order to kind of recruit people into the religion, or bait people into the religion. And I don't always think it's a bad thing. I think that this is a bit of a more ignorant type of thing, but nonetheless, it happened to me. And that was pretty much the start of like the external validation. And so, you know, you hear these pastors, these people that you should be able to rely on, these people who are quite literally supposed to be hearing from God, which when you really think about it, I say this all the time, I don't know what would make anybody in their right mind go into ministry. You know, to say that you are someone who is consistently hearing from the supernatural is quite literally crazy to me. You know what I mean? And I just think that that is a huge, huge task and responsibility that I just feel like I don't even think many pastors even consider the realities of that. That's crazy. That's literally crazy. So anyway, fast forward, and you're hearing these pastors and they're saying things like, well, if you want to meet a man, you need to get out of the club. And a lot of this rhetoric is very anti-Black. And it's anti-Black because it forces you to seek a certain type of partner who fits more of a aesthetic of a good guy or a good person versus someone who's really like a good person, who has a clean heart. And I started to notice this when there was kind of like the demonization of the Black man's aesthetic. We know that Black men are typically rocking streetwear, urban wear, whatever you want to call it, okay? And we know that Black people just in general are a lot more creatively fashionable. And, you know, with our quote unquote adornment within Christian communities, it's seen as something that is bad. It's seen as something that is like, you know, like it's not cool. You know what I mean? Like you are judged for how you look, you know? And so it's kind of rooted in whiteness in those ways. And so it'll very easily have you out here judging people based on the outside. And you really get lost in the sauce. And so I just kind of wanted to come on here and just, I guess, shine a light on this. I don't really know where anyone is going with these conversations. Even as I read that article on the Substack, none of us know what to do with this. You know, none of us know what to do with these experiences that we're having with the Black church, right? It's supposed to be our haven, our refuge from a society that is already inherently exclusive. You know what I mean? So it's like, we don't really have a haven. This is supposed to be the one place where we should be able to go and we're safe and we're acknowledged and we're seen, but it's not for a lot of us. And it's incredibly derailing, you know, psychologically. And so I was listening to Joyce Meyer this morning because I do like to stay spiritually grounded and I like to stay grounded in my faith. Again, it's complex, but she said something that just had me thinking about my own personal experiences encountering people in the church and how it just was like so crazy to me. Like it was insanity. Like I can't even wrap my mind around it. But you know, her just kind of talking about like forgiveness and this whole thing of like, well, we have to forgive because God has forgiven us and, you know, we have sinned and we've fallen short and, you know, that rhetoric that's along the lines and that's always preached to people where there's been an injustice. And I don't know what just came to my mind right now, but the woman thou art who lose, I don't know why that just came to my mind, but, you know, the scene where she shoots her predator, you know, in the church. And I'm just thinking about like the pain and the suffering and how it just goes unchecked. And it's this constant thing of like, well, we just have to forgive. And I have to disagree. It's not to say you don't forgive people. And it's not to say you don't, you know, you do what you will with that. Let me just say that. You do what you will. I know what the word says. We're supposed to forgive 70 times 7. But I just think that there's really something sinister in that. And there's really something sinister that is the grounds of religious communities, you know, and it's not this thing of like, you enter into this community because you need this grace, right? It's like you enter into this community and you take advantage of the fact that people have these virtues and these beliefs of unrelenting forgiveness, right? And it is so sickening. It really is. It's so sickening because you would think that you have this thing of like, oh, there's grace, I can get it right. But no, you actually, what you do is like you set people up to be so predatory because there are no consequences for their behavior. You know, there's no consequences for doing wrong. There's no consequences for being anything but a man or woman of God, you know, and the reality is that for so many Black women, because we are so disproportionately impacted by, you know, the loneliness and all the other things that come with womanhood that we cannot address here because nobody cares about the vulnerability. And, you know, it typically will be exploited even if you were to express anything of that nature, right? You are required to be strong and to quite literally do the impossible, right? Otherwise, if you cannot do the impossible, you are then seen as weak and you are considered desperate, right? Black women don't get that opportunity to say, hey, I'm a woman, I have desires. So that's probably one of the more troubling things about being a Black woman. Yeah, and that goes all across the board. So anyway, yeah, these pastors are exploiting women and other people as well. And the constant rhetoric is like, you know, it's never to encourage anybody that God is actually a God of justice because he says that, you know, it's to essentially cover their own selves. You have these pastors who won't address injustice, who won't address the predatory nature of some of these men in here who are just here to get their lust fulfilled, okay? And it is disproportionately men that are in the church preying on other people. It's not typically women, and that's something that just constantly goes unaddressed. Why? Because most of the men within religious communities are partaking in this very deplorable, this very pernicious, okay, this very harmful behavior. And because every man in this, pastors, so forth, people who have grown up in the church, men have grown up in the church, because so many of them have partaken in this nature, in this behavior, in this predatory behavior, they won't call it out. They won't address it. So that's why every sermon is always going to be directed towards women. You got this man in your bed and your husband can't come. You got all those shoes in your closet and you won't tithe. It's always directed towards women, right? Your husband cheats. Well, Joyce Meyer, I heard her say, she talked about a women's conference and she referenced how she couldn't be happy unless her husband was happy. So there's this to the death servitude that is required of women, and it's not required of men. And even the Bible doesn't even instruct it to be that way. You know what I mean? And it's never addressed. There's never any commentary around it. Why? Because most of the men within these religious communities are partaking in the exploitation of women. And it's so heartbreaking and it's so debilitating, right? I'm getting ready to just kind of do a little bit of research today on some human trafficking. It just came to my mind when I was getting my coffee, and I was like, what am I going to do today? I'm going to use this time to just research human trafficking in American societies, which demographics are impacted, and which, communities are exploited the most, okay? That's just something I'm going to do today because that's just what I like to do. But I was just thinking, you have women and children. You have people who are very vulnerable, who come to these communities and they're seeking haven. Black people especially, who don't have that within American society, right? Are completely excluded from American society. Can't even go anywhere to get any resources in real time. And you go to the church and there's further and greater exploitation. And it's so sickening. Like, honestly, it's so sickening. It's really heartbreaking. And there's never any justice. Nothing ever happens. Nothing ever happens. It's like, okay, we just kind of go on, we turn a blind eye. We don't hold people accountable. And when I say people, men specifically, because that's just the reality. And I don't know how anybody could turn a blind eye to this. I don't even know how men could turn a blind eye to this, other than the fact that they are partakers in this same very predatory nature that is fostered within the Black church and within church communities. Well, let me just say Black church, because I ain't never been nowhere else, honey. I'm not a Catholic, never been to a mosque, never been to, what I mean? So let me just, let me dial it back. But it's sad. It's sad because, women may not make as much, especially if you're a single mother and so forth. Like, there's all these things that kind of go into that. And what should be a safe place and what should be a refuge has now become nothing more, and has probably always been nothing more than a predatory ground, to exploit women. And that's what the Substack was talking about, and how, women endure so much, Black women specifically. You give so much, you endure so much. And it's not always like this. I won't say that this is general, right? And I won't speak for every person because not everybody's had these experiences, but I don't know, I think sometimes people can get so caught up in religion that they really forget what it is to be a person, what it is to feel, what it is to stick up for injustice, what it is to have a sense of purpose and a fire inside of you to call things out, to be courageous, to be a person of character. Sometimes you get so caught up in following rules, you forget what it is to kind of live life and to be somebody who, is a person of character, again, integrity, somebody who's actually quote unquote upright, right? Someone who's actually living righteous. We get so caught up in, this person's saying this person's cursing. I've always kind of had this thing with my sin and me cursing. I'm like, listen, sweetie, I'd rather have my sin on my sleeve than to be somebody who's wicked in my heart. Like, you know what I mean? I'd rather it be what it is. I don't have anything to hide. You know what I mean? Judas. Okay? I'd rather be somebody who, it is what it is. You can see my faults. You can see my flaws than to be somebody who is so wicked on the inside, and it's so crazy, so through the religious communities, there's a demonization of R&B and so forth. And I just so happened to was listening to Erykah Badu And she said, we could talk about Revelations 3:17. And I heard this song many times before. I said, let me actually go and look up Revelations 3:17. And girl, what I found in Revelations 3:17 was, you know, just talking about the church. And it was so timely. And it was talking about how people, you know, think that they are so blessed. And the whole time, like, they can't even see that they are deprived, you know, morally and materially. You know, and so it's so crazy because so much of what religion fosters is so contradictory to God. So much of what it fosters is so contradictory to anything that Jesus ever preached, you know. And this is why I always try to be so mindful when I'm distinguishing between religion and I'm critiquing religion and church culture versus God, because much of it is man-made. Okay, much of this is man-made. None of this is anything that God has ever said. You know, and people like drinking and all these type of lifestyle choices, which again, to each his own. You do what's best for you. You do what you feel right, you know, but the shame that just comes from living and existing, that is enough to kind of eat you away to where you don't believe that you are worthy of anything. And when you're Black, on top of that, that is enough to really silo you from your essence, your community, from people who really love you, you know, and from people who will really be good to you, you know. So I think I'm gonna end there. I think that's all I gotta say. But yeah, man, it is wild out there. Okay, you guys be safe. I know this is a wave right now. A lot of people are jumping on, and I just want to say, like, there's nothing wrong with seeking God and your refuge, but just know the Holy Spirit can meet you right in your living room. Okay, just know that, like, you don't have to. And quite frankly, I wrote an article about this. I think it was like 2023. It's so crazy. Time has flown. Okay, it's on Medium. But I spoke about why you need to keep your faith and your spiritual practice to yourself. You know, like, sometimes we can be on fire for God. We'll have a good worship session. You know, we want to share things. And I think it just kind of comes out sometimes. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not telling you how to live your life. But it is important that you keep your spiritual practices to yourself. And that's what I'll say. You know, you don't have to be ashamed of the gospel. Okay. But I'm just saying, like, seriously, because you have a lot of people who are using this as a means to exploit other people. And just like in the video, I talked about how community is no longer a safe haven for anybody, not just religion communities, but community in general, right? Because you have a bunch of people who are in the category of the have-nots, right? We no longer have a middle class, okay? It is the have and the have-nots. And more people are in here in this space, okay? And so what community, the things that we used to have that the haves have not had, right? Because they're not in community, right? They've got all these different things, right? But they don't have community. They don't have that ability to organize like we do here in the general public. And so that used to be a privilege. But now, because we have taken on their paradigms, right? Here we are, and we do have this ability to still organize and to build community, but that community is a means for a lot of people to stand on the necks of other people to reach this category of people, which is the haves, okay? So community is no longer a safe place, you know. Yeah, I was gonna say it would be like common sense to be like, yeah, you should guard your heart, you shouldn't go and trusting everybody, but no, there's a certain type of requirement that should be required and if even expected from people who are in the church, right? But it's not that way anymore. And we can go on and on. I can go on and on critiquing this, but I just kind of wanted to make this video to kind of shine a light on this, because I think this is for a lot of Black women who feel the same way. And it is incredibly troubling, you know, because you find yourself in this space where you just feel cast away, you know, and you're like, okay, is it because I'm intellectualizing, you know, you love God, but it's not like that at all. You know, it's the organization. And unfortunately, I don't think that there will be much change until Jesus comes back and flips the tables. Thank you for listening.